Hi, 7th grade. Welcome back. Today we're going to start by looking at the exit ticket, similar to what we've done in the past. Number one, only 58% of students got this question right, and that's finding the location where the Renaissance started. The Renaissance started in Italy, and Italy is the boot-shaped country in Europe. Number five, if you look at number five, look at the bottom, this area. You see the heel and then the toe. That's where the Renaissance started in the country, modern day country of Italy. And you'll see that its location is very important because they're able to control trade between East and West, between West and the East, especially with the Muslims. Okay? So that question will appear again on your exit ticket. Number two. True or false? The Renaissance was only about art and culture. The answer is false. It involved arts, culture, sculpture, arts, sculpture, engineering, architecture, philosophy, astronomy, science, invention. It involved many different aspects. It was not just about art or sculpture. Which of the following is true about the Renaissance? People began to question the past. People began to think of new ideas. People of the Renaissance placed value on learning and education. They wanted to become more educated. They wanted to expand ideas. And they were heavily influenced by the classical. The incorrect answers have to do with religion. This one says totally rejected religion, which is incorrect. People of the Renaissance were very religious. And the opposite, right? They didn't just focus on religion, right? They also focused on other things. The Medicis were very powerful in the city-state of Florence. Most of you guys got that question right. Patron is someone that provides financial support to someone, like they give them money in return for a painting or a building, right? So financial support is someone that provides patronage. When you say the issue here is the first one is lend. Like if you lend money to someone, you're a bank or you're someone that expects something in return, that money back. When you're a patron, you don't expect money back. The main method that the Medici made their money was through banking, right? When you go to the bank and you borrow money, you pay it back plus interest, plus a fee. And that's what the Medicis were doing. They were able to loan so much money that they made a lot of money out of it. Humanism is the beauty of the individual should be celebrated. People should be celebrated. People should be honored. People should be exalted. And life on earth should be celebrated and enjoyed, right? It's not just about religion. How did the plague impact the church? The plague impacted the church because people lost some faith in the church because the church was not able to save them from this disease, right? Another reason why the church lost power was because so many priests died during the plague. Renaissance humanism involves the scholars of most valued, the scholars of Greece and Rome, right? They looked back at Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Thucydides, Pythagoras, people of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, Cicero, people of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and they wanted to continue this. What did patrons get out of right? This is the reason why I gave you guys that question at the beginning of the unit. What would you do with $100 million, right? You don't just... The point of that question is because you have so much money, you're going to give it to someone, not because maybe you are a great person, right? But you want something in return. And in this case, it's status and recognition. That's why we have people like Mark Zuckerberg or very wealthy people like Bill Gates giving a lot of money because they want to be known as philanthropists, people that give money to good causes. There's a reason why they do it. True or false? The Renaissance completely got rid of ideas of religion. The answer is false. You'll see that a lot of the works from the Renaissance are religious. Identify the period. This is a period when human innovation, new inventions, challenge the past, realistic arts, secular means non-religious, study the world. This is the Renaissance. If you pick Middle Ages, I'm concerned because that's not it. And then the last question that I had was, what were some of the other jobs that the Medici family had? being a patron is not really a job. Some people said poets. Some people said artists. Not necessarily, right? I was thinking of poet, of not poet, of a pope, right? Some of them became popes, and also queens. Some of them became queens. Okay, so classical. I'm gonna take some notes. I strongly suggest that you get a piece of paper and you take notes with me, because you can use this on your exit ticket. So classical is Greece, Rome. Languages are primarily Latin and Greek, right? Achievements in architecture, arts, writing, there's drama like acting, right? Math, science. So this is considered like a golden age of European history, okay? And then we get to the Middle Ages. Now, many things happen in the Middle Ages. I don't want you to think that, to believe this idea of the Renaissance people saying that the Middle Ages was a completely dead period. It wasn't, right? Life was difficult. Life was difficult, but life is difficult in the Renaissance too. So the Middle Ages, there is a lack of education for most people. Okay. The only people that can read or write are primarily people that work for the church. Those are known as clergy members. Okay. Most writing is done in Latin. Is in Latin. You see Latin here too. We have writing done by hand. Right? This is before the invention of the printing press. Most writing is done by hand. All writing is done by hand because there's no printing press. Religion is most important. Most important. Religion is most important. Now, let's look at the Renaissance, okay? This is similar to lack of education, right? Most people are not being educated. For most people. Most people are not being educated, right? We have the invention of the printing press. Faster books, faster creation of books, faster writing. Faster writing of books. Those books are written in Latin, but also other languages. Latin plus other languages. Let's get some of these languages. Languages such as Spanish, German, Italian, French, and so forth. You will see that most people that can read in the Renaissance, they can't read Latin. Latin is a dead language. Most people that can read, they're not reading Latin because they don't understand how to read it. Only church officials know how to read that, okay? Religion importance is important, but so is humanism. So is humanism. Okay. Um, this is just comparing and contrasting. Now, you'll see that a lot of what happens in the Renaissance is borrowed from here. Okay, science, math, writing, arts, architecture, Greek, Latin, Rome, Greece. So you'll see that when we talk about the architecture, you'll see that when I mean architecture, I mean buildings. You'll see that the architecture of the Renaissance looks very similar to this. Okay, we're gonna talk a little bit about the Medici family. This video is going to be quite long, so please pay close attention. Okay, we're not gonna read all of this because we don't have the time. During the Renaissance Europe, families of rich businessmen sponsor, right, with patrons, artists, and other creative people. The artists loved this because they were able to spend all their time painting and were supported to do so. Right? Da Vinci had someone pay him to do something he loved. The sponsors, known as patrons of the arts, also benefited because they were able to spread culture in their city and also get recognition. They become more popular. Right? Maybe people can, if you build a library, then someone's probably gonna say, "Well, that person seems like a good person. Maybe I'll put my money in their bank." One of the largest sponsors during the Renaissance was the Medici family, who were wool merchants and bankers. They are sometimes known as the godfathers of the Renaissance. Think about what a godfather is, right? They lived in Florence, Italy, and made it and the land surrounding it known as Tuscany, the center of the Renaissance culture. The area has remained that way ever since. The Medici's family began their rise in Florence in the 1200s. In the late 1300s, Giovanni de' Medici brought the family to its prominence, or its glory. His banking business, the Medici banks, prospered and became bankers of the Pope. So even the Pope did business with them. Giovanni was elected the ruler of Florence, and his descendants ruled for many years to come. Cosimo de' Medici, Giovanni's son, was born in 1389. He was also a powerful ruler of Florence. By now, the Medici was both rich and powerful. Cosimo became involved in a rivalry between the Medici and the Albizzi family. At one point, Cosimo was even banished or kicked away from Florence. However, he quickly returned and became a great patron, again the word patron, of the arts. He sponsored many artists, including Brunelleschi. You'll see this guy is very important later. Donatello, one of the turtles, and Fra Angelico. Cosimo also opened the world's first public library. So think about why is he opening these libraries, right? In 1444, Lorenzo de' Medici was born. He was also a businessman, politician, and patron of the arts. He supported some of the most famous names of the Renaissance, including Botticelli and Michelangelo. You will need to know these guys, so just keep an eye for them. In 1479, Giuliano de' Medici was assassinated by we're going to skip there. We're not going to do that one. Two members of the Medici family were elected as popes in the 1500s. Pope Leo, you'll need to know this guy. He is very famous. And Clement VII. This time period was troublesome for the Medici family. The Medici popes and other popes of the era were accused of abusing the wealth and power of the church. A total of 4 Medici families were members of the Pope, were popes. The Pope is the leader of the Catholic Church in Europe at this time. The Catholic Church is the most powerful religion in Europe at this time. So the Pope is the top of that religion. In 1519, Cosimo I was born. He was trained in the family business and philosophy. He was one of the first people of the Renaissance to be called a humanist because of his beliefs in the value of individual human beings. He was crowned the Grand Duke of Tuscany in 1569 after marrying the royalty. So here, I'm going to stop this here, but this is going to talk about some of the queens that became queens because they married a king in Europe. The Medici supported Galileo Galilei, who was even a tutor of the Medici children. He named 4 of the moons of Jupiter after the Medici children, even though the names were later changed. Okay, so this is the Medici family, very powerful family. incredibly powerful and important development of the Renaissance.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about something that ought to be more controversial, the Renaissance. So you probably already know about the Renaissance thanks to the work of noted Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael, but that isn't the whole story. Mr. Green, what about Splinter? I think he was an architect? Oh, me from the past, you're such an idiot. Splinter was a painter, sculptor, and an architect. He was quite a
He wasn't. He's being silly.
Renaissance rat. Right, so the story goes that the Renaissance saw the rebirth of European culture after the miserable Dark Ages, and that it ushered in the modern era of secularism, rationality, and individualism. And those are all on the list of things we like here at Crash Course. Mr. Green, I think you're forgetting Cool Ranch Dorito.
Word to know, secular. Secular means non-religious. For example, the painting of the Mona Lisa is a secular piece because it is a non-religious piece.
Yeah, fair enough. Then what's so controversial? Well, the whole idea of a European Renaissance presupposes that Europe was like an island unto itself that was briefly enlightened when the Greeks were ascendant and then lost its way and then rediscovered its former European glory. Furthermore, I'm going to argue that the Renaissance didn't even necessarily happen. But first, let's assume that it did. Essentially, the Renaissance was an efflorescence of arts, primarily visual, but also to a lesser extent literary, and ideas in Europe that coincided with the rediscovery of Roman and Greek culture. It's easiest to see this in terms of visual art. Renaissance art tends to feature a focus on the human form, somewhat idealized, as Roman and especially Greek art had. And this classicized...
You'll see when we study the sculptures that a lot of the Renaissance sculptures look very similar to the classical sculptures. A lot of the buildings of the Renaissance look very similar to the classical buildings. And we'll talk about specifically about similarities, especially in buildings.
Thing is also rather apparent in the architecture of the Renaissance, which featured all sorts of Greek columns and triangular pediments and Roman arches and domes. In fact, looking at a Renaissance building, you might even be able to fool yourself into thinking you're looking at an actual Greek building if you sort of squint and ignore the fact that Greek buildings tend to be, you know, ruins. In addition to rediscovering, that is, copying Greek and Roman art, the Renaissance saw the rediscovery of Greek and Roman writings and their ideas. And that opened up a whole new world for scholars. Well, not a new world, actually, since the texts were more than 1,000 years old. But you know what I mean. The scholars who examined, translated, and commented upon these writings were called humanists, which can be a little bit of a confusing term because it implies that they were concerned with, you know, humans rather than, say, the religious world, which can add to the common but totally incorrect assumption that Renaissance writers and artists and scholars were, like, secretly not religious. That's a favorite area of speculation on the internet and in Dan Brown novels, but the truth is that Renaissance artists were religious. As evidence, let me present you with the fact that they painted the Madonna over and over and over and over and over and Stan! Anyway.
The Madonna is the name given to the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ. So whenever you hear Madonna and child, that is referring to the Virgin Mary and Jesus. The scholars of the Renaissance, most of them were highly religious, but what they did was they combined their religion with classical understanding. They combined their religion with humanism. We study especially Michelangelo, you'll see that a lot of his statues, a lot of his paintings are religious, but he's still celebrating the human body. So it's a marriage. It's a combination of classical and religious ideas.
Humanism means is that these scholars studied what were called the humanities: literature, philosophy, history. Today, of course, these areas of study are known as the so-called dark arts. What? Liberal arts? Oh, Stan, you're always making history less fun. I want to be a professor of the dark arts.
A dark arts job. It's a dangerous position.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So we'll stick with this. Right, so here at Crash Course, we try not to focus too much on dates, but if I'm going to convince you that the Renaissance didn't actually happen, I should probably tell you, when it didn't happen. So traditionally, the Renaissance is associated with the 15th and 16th centuries. The Renaissance happened all across Europe, but we're going to focus on Italy because I want to and I own the video camera. Plus, Italy really spawned the Renaissance. What was it about Italy that lent itself to Renaissancing? Was it the wine, the olives, the pasta, the plumbers, the relative permissiveness when it comes to the moral lassitude of their leaders? Well, let's go to the thought bubble. Italy was primed for Renaissance for exactly one reason: money. A society has to be super rich to support artists and elaborate building projects and to feed scholars who translate and comment on thousand-year-old documents, and the Italian city-states were very wealthy.
Think of like think of the cities around the world today that are the most advanced, the ones that have the most culture, the ones that are the most amazing, the ones that have the best art, sculpture, architecture. They are very wealthy, and they're wealthy for different reasons, but it has to do with trade. Think of San Francisco, think of London, think of New York, Shanghai, think of Tokyo. These cities where a lot of people live, and it's a cultural center. There's millions of people living in these cities, and it's a multicultural center.
Two reasons. First, many city-states were mini industrial powerhouses, each specializing in a particular industrial product, like Florence made cloth, Milan made arms. Second, the cities of Venice and Genoa got stinking rich from trade. Genoa turned out a fair number of top-notch sailors, like, for instance, Christopher Columbus, but the Venetians became the richest city-state of all. As you'll remember from the Crusades, the Venetians were expert sailors, shipbuilders, and merchants, and as you'll remember from our discussions of Indian Ocean trade, they also had figured out ways to trade with Islamic empires, including the biggest economic power in the region, the Ottomans. Without
The Ottomans are also the people that took over the Byzantine Empire.
trading with the Islamic world, especially in pepper, Venice couldn't have afforded all those painters, nor would they have had money to pay for the incredibly fancy clothes they put on to pose for their fancy portraits. The clothes, the paint, the painters, enough food to get a double chin, all of that was paid for with money from trade with the Ottomans. I know I talk a lot about trade, but that's because it's so incredibly awesome, and it really does bind the world together. And while trade can lead to conflicts, on balance, it has been responsible for more peaceful contacts than violent ones because, death is bad for business. This was certainly the case in the Eastern Mediterranean, where the periods of trade-based diplomacy were longer and more frequent than periods of war, even though all we ever talk about is war because it's very dramatic, which is why my brother Hank's favorite video game is called Assassin's Creed, not some Venetian guys negotiate a trade treaty. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So here's another example of non-Europeans supporting the Renaissance. The Venetians exported textiles to the Ottomans.
Pay close attention to this. They're going to use the word export. Export means sell. I'll rewind it. When you export something, you're selling it. When you are importing something, you are bringing it in or buying.
Negotiate a trade treaty. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So here's another example of non-Europeans supporting the Renaissance. The Venetians exported textiles to the Ottomans. They were usually woven in other cities like Florence, and the reason Florentine textiles were so valuable is because their color remained vibrant. That was because they were dyed with a chemical called alum, which was primarily found in Anatolia in the Ottoman Empire. So to make the textiles the Ottomans craved, the Italians needed Ottoman alum, at least until 1460, when Giovanni de Castro, Pope Pius II's godson, discovered alum in Italy in Tolfa. And he wrote to his godfather, the Pope, "Today I bring you victory over the Turk. Every year they wring from the Christians more than 300,000 ducats for the alum with which we dye wool various colors, but I have found 7 mountains so rich in this material that they could supply 7 worlds. If you will give orders to engage workmen, build furnaces, and smelt the ore, you will provide all Europe with alum, and the Turk will lose all his profits. Instead, they will accrue to you." So the Pope was like, heck yeah! More importantly, he granted a monopoly on the mining rights of alum to a particular Florentine family.
So they discover alum in Italy, and guess who's going to be in charge of producing this or getting it out of the ground?
The Medicis, the ones you always see painted. But vitally, Italian alum mines didn't bring victory over the Turks or cause them to lose all their profits, just as mining and drilling at home never obviate the need for trade. Okay, one last way the Islamic world helped to create the European Renaissance, if indeed it happened. The Muslim world was the source of many of the writings that Renaissance scholars studied. For centuries, Muslim scholars have been working their way through ancient Greek writings, especially Ptolemy and Aristotle, who, despite being consistently wrong about everything managed to be the jumping off point for thinking both in the Christian and Muslim worlds. And the fall of Constantinople in 1453 helped further spread Greek ideas because Byzantine scholars fled for Italy, taking their books with them, so we have the Ottomans to thank for that too. And even after it became a Muslim capital, Istanbul was still like the #1 destination for book nerds searching for ancient Greek texts. Plus, if we stretch our definition of Renaissance thought to include scientific thought, there is a definite case to be made that Muslim scholars influenced Copernicus, arguably the...
So right now he's talking about how the Muslims impacted the Renaissance, how the Muslims impacted the development of the Renaissance in Europe.
Renaissance's greatest mind. Oh, it's time for the open letter? An open letter to Copernicus. But first, let's see what's in the secret compartment today. Wow, the heliocentric solar system? Cool! Earth in the middle, sun in the middle, Earth in the middle, sun in the middle. Ptolemy, Copernicus.
Up until the Renaissance, people in Europe, including the church, believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, which is incorrect, right? That God had put people in the center of the universe. And if you went against that idea, you could get in trouble with the church. Similar to what happened to Galileo. Galileo published works, he said, things that went against the church, and as a result, he was punished for it. So the Renaissance was also a scientific revolution.
Ptolemy, Copernicus! Right, an open letter to Copernicus. Dear Copernicus, why you always gotta make the rest of us look so bad? You were both a lawyer and a doctor? That doesn't seem fair. You spoke 4 languages and discovered that the Earth is not the center of the universe? Come on! But at least you didn't discover it entirely on your own. Now, there's no way to be sure that you had access to Muslim scholarship on this topic. But one of your diagrams is so similar to a proof found in an Islamic mathematics treatise that it's almost impossible you didn't have access to it. Even the letters on the diagram are almost the same, so at least I can tell my mom that when she asks why I'm not a doctor and a lawyer and the guy who discovered the heliocentric solar system. Best wishes, John Green. All right, so now having spent the last several minutes telling you why the Renaissance happened in Italy and not in, I don't know, like India or Russia or whatever, I'm going to argue that the Renaissance did not in fact happen.
So now he's going to argue why the Renaissance didn't happen. And I tend to agree with him in some aspects, right?
Let's start with the problem of time. The Renaissance isn't like the Battle of Hastings or the French Revolution, where people were aware that they were living amid history. Like when I was 11, and most of you didn't exist yet, my dad made my brother and me turn off the Cosby Show and watch people climbing on the Berlin Wall so we could see history. But no,
that was 1989.
Like woke their kids up in a Tuscan village in 1512, like, Mario, Luigi, come outside, the Renaissance is here! Hurry, we're living in a glorious new era where man's relationship to learning is changing. I somehow feel a new sense of individualism based on my capacity for reason. No, in fact, most people in Europe were totally unaware of the Renaissance because its art and learning affected a tiny sliver of the European population. Like, life expectancy in many areas of Europe actually went down during the Renaissance. Art and learning of the Renaissance didn't filter down to most people the way that technology does today, and really the Renaissance was only experienced by the richest of the rich and those people, like painters, who served them. I mean, there were some commercial opportunities, like for framing paintings or binding books, but the vast majority of Europeans still lived on farms either as free peasants or tenants. And the rediscovery of Aristotle didn't in any way change their lives, which were governed by the rising and setting of the sun and intellectually by the Catholic Church. In fact, probably about 95% of Europeans never encountered the Renaissance's opulence or art or modes of thought. We have constructed the Renaissance as important not because it was so central to the 15th century. I mean, at the time, Europe wasn't the world's leader in anything other than the tiny business of Atlantic trade. We remember it as important because it matters to us now. It gave us the Ninja Turtles. We care about Aristotle and individualism and the Mona Lisa and the possibility that Michelangelo painted an anatomically correct brain onto the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel because these things give us a narrative that makes sense. Europe was enlightened, and then it was unenlightened, and then it was re-enlightened, and ever since it's been the center of art and commerce and history. See that cycle of life and death and rebirth a lot in historical recollection, but it just isn't accurate. So it's true that many of the ideas introduced to Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries became very important. But remember, when we talk about the Renaissance, we're talking about hundreds of years. I mean, although they share Ninja Turtledom, Donatello and Raphael were born 97 years apart. And the Renaissance humanist Petrarch was born in 1304, 229 years before the Renaissance humanist Montaigne. That's almost as long as the United States has existed. So was the Renaissance a thing? Not really. It was a lot of mutually interdependent things that occurred over centuries. Stupid truth always resisting simplicity. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.
Words to know. Classical, vernacular, secular, humanism. Those are words you need to know. Next week, you'll be taking a quiz on the start of the Renaissance. On Monday and Tuesday, we're going to focus on context clues, and you'll take your quiz on Wednesday. Please take your time with your videos. Please take your time with your exit ticket. I will be resetting it if it's under 50% for the ed puzzle. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.